Alright guys, so we are starting a new unit, and in this new unit we are going to be covering cellular respiration and photosynthesis. And both of these are just essentially some complex metabolic pathways. So just to kind of go back to earlier lessons, in metabolism, we know that metabolism are all of the chemical reactions that are taking place in your cells and in your body. And so within metabolism, we have catabolic pathways that are breaking down and releasing energy, and we have anabolic pathways that are building and storing energy. And so there's going to be a lot of reactions that are happening in cellular respiration, and there's going to be overall, it's all about making energy and producing energy for our cells. Now, you probably know a little bit about cellular respiration from freshman biology, but we're going to kind of expand on it quite a bit in dual credit bio. I'm going to do my best to kind of walk you through, but it can be very technical. And so something I want you to understand is that everything we're talking about through the process of cellular respiration and photosynthesis, it's a chemical thing. Okay, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about the whys so much as the whats. What is happening? And the reason it's happening is because they're chemicals that are interacting with each other. We're making bonds, we're breaking bonds, and we don't, really have to think about the why, because they just do. Okay, we're going to see enzyme catalyzed reactions, and we're going to see just chemicals interacting. So we're going to try to make it as simple and easy as we possibly can, even though it can be a tough topic. And so really what it's all about, cellular respiration, big picture, and this is something that I'm going to want you to know. Over the course of these, we can kind of get bogged down in little details, but big picture is we need energy, okay? And we're going to be saying this word over and over and over again. There's different types of energy, and so one form of energy that we're going to be looking at is energy that's stored in organic compounds. And this is what we call chemical energy. Anytime you have energy stored in like foods or big molecules, it's going to be a type of chemical energy. And so back when we covered macromolecules, we talked about how carbs equal sugar equal energy. That's going to be the main organic compound that we break down for energy. But we could also, technically, anytime you break bonds, you could release energy. And so fats store lots of energy. We could use proteins, but it's not necessarily a molecule that we want to break down. And so as heterotrophs, we have to eat. So heterotrophs consume food. They can't make it for themselves. And so when we eat, essentially we're going to get these organic compounds, but then we have to break them down to release the energy that you will find inside of them. And so that's what a catabolic pathway does. The key to catabolism is that we are breaking bonds, and through breaking bonds, we are releasing energy. And so anytime a bond is broken, energy is going to be released. And so what we're going to be doing over the course of cellular respiration is we're going to be slowly breaking down molecules and releasing energy in small steps. And so there's two major catabolic pathways that you'll find in living things. You've got fermentation, which is part of anaerobic respiration, and the key here is no oxygen. Remember that if you put an or an a in front of something, it means no or not. So aerobic uses oxygen and anaerobic does not. Now this one is much more efficient. As we go through, we're going to be looking at numbers, and so cellular respiration produces around anywhere the 30 range, around 36 to 40, somewhere around in there. Cellular respiration produces about 30-something ATPs per glucose, whereas anaerobic respiration only produces 2. And so this one is much, much more efficient, and this is the pathway that we want to take if we are able. And so when we're looking at cellular respiration, glucose is going to be the main molecule used. This is why we said carbs give us energy. Those monosaccharides like glucose are going to be the easiest and most efficient for us to break down in order to produce energy in the form of ATP. And so we've actually talked about this molecule before. And with ATP, there's 3 phosphates. And to release energy, we are going to break off a phosphate. Well, to make energy, we're going to add that phosphate back on. And that's really what this whole reaction is going to be about. It's about producing these ATPs by adding phosphates onto that ADP. Now, cellular respiration can be a little bit deceiving because this right here is the overall reaction for cellular respiration. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to try a pen here. I don't really like red. I'm going to go for purple. And so just to kind of recap, so over here we have glucose and we have oxygen. If we don't know this formula for glucose, we need to get familiar with it. Okay, these are going to be my reactants in the reaction. And so glucose is going to come in through our diet, and then oxygen is going to be the gas that we breathe in. And by the way, this whole reaction is why we breathe in oxygen. I mean, you probably know if you don't have oxygen, you die. And the reason why is because without oxygen, we can't make much of this. Okay, so this is why we have to breathe in oxygen right here. So these are going to be the reactants in my overall reaction, and then these are going to be my products. So you do need to be familiar with the reaction as a whole. Okay, so I have two reactants in cellular respiration. I've got glucose and oxygen, and I have at least three products. I've got carbon dioxide, so this is why we exhale CO2, why we breathe in, why we breathe out. Okay, I'm going to produce some water, which is just going to be in our cells, and then we're also going to produce energy. Now this is what we're wanting. We're wanting ATP, but in any type of catabolic reaction, a lot of times some energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. So it's not going to be 100% efficient. So overall, okay, this is the reaction for cellular respiration, but we're going to see that there's actually many reactions that are kind of added together to make this one big one. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be digesting large molecules into smaller ones. And anytime you break bonds, energy is going to be released. And essentially what we're going to be doing is seeing energy in different forms. So something that may be foreign to you, I don't know if you've had a pretty good chemistry background, hopefully we know that electrons are also energy. Okay, so not only are we going to release energy as we break bonds, but as electrons get moved around, they're going to carry energy with them. So you may remember in an atom, you know, you have your protons and neutrons in the nucleus, and then your electrons are out there moving in the electron cloud. The further away they get from the nucleus, the more energy they have, and so electrons are a form of energy. And so when we move electrons from one place to another, they're going to be carrying energy with them. And so just a little bit to understand here. And so electrons don't normally move by themselves. They normally move with a proton as part of an H atom. And so anytime we move H's around, we are going to be moving electrons with them. And hopefully in chemistry you covered oxidation reduction reactions. We're not going to go too much into the reactions themselves. We just kind of need a basic understanding that when we shuttle electrons around, we're moving energy with them. And so what we're going to be doing over the course of cellular respiration is we are going to be oxidizing glucose, and we're going to be moving those hydrogens with electrons to something else. And anytime you transfer those electrons to something else, we are reducing them, which means we're energizing them. So we're going to break down glucose in a series of steps, and we're going to shuttle those hydrogens along with electrons to other molecules. And when we do that, we are reducing them, okay? And so what you really need to understand is that electrons equal energy, and we're going to be moving electrons with a hydrogen. I'm going to go back to my pen here. So a hydrogen atom has one proton and one electron, okay? Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving an additional electron with that proton, okay? And so essentially when we move that hydrogen, we're moving a proton and two electrons, okay? And so that's how we're shuttling electrons around. So what we have here are redox reactions. They're kind of coupled together. You can't oxidize one thing without reducing another, so they go together. And so in a redox reaction, they are going to be releasing energy. I don't want that to be purple. They're going to be releasing energy as they break down molecules. So they're going to be taking electrons and they're going to be moving them with that hydrogen. In the case of cellular respiration, we are oxidizing glucose, and then they're going to be going to that oxygen where we are reducing them. And so if you aren't familiar with oxidation reduction reactions, here's a couple mnemonic devices to help you. Leo the lion says grr. So Leo means a loss of electrons is oxidation. Okay, so when we lose electrons, it's oxidation. When we gain electrons, it's reduction. All right, so a loss of electrons is oxidation. Gaining electrons is reduction. So essentially whatever's getting energized is said to be reduced. Okay, anytime you see that word reduced, it means we're moving energy to that. Then oil rig is oxidation is a loss, reduction is a gain. Okay, so you can use either one. When I was in school, I learned Leo the lion says grr. I like it better, but you can use either one. So whatever we're oxidizing is losing electrons, so we're stripping the hydrogens away from it. Once again, in cellular respiration, that's going to be glucose. And then we're going to be reducing other molecules, and when we do that, they're going to be gaining electrons. All right, so before we actually get into the chemical reactions of cellular respiration, there's one more thing that we need to cover, and that is electron carriers. Okay, once again, this is all chemical. I know it seems crazy. This is going to be something that we haven't really talked about before, but these are all just chemicals, okay, and they're doing their chemical thing. So electron carriers are going to carry electrons for us. Now, earlier I said that electrons are energy. So here's what I need you to do, okay? Anytime we talk about electron carriers, what they are doing is they are carrying electrons and storing energy to be used later. All right, I'm going to say this over and over and over again. Okay, if I were in the classroom, I would say this over and over and over again. The purpose of electron carriers is to carry electrons, which is going to be carrying energy to be used later. So one of the things we're going to keep up with as we go through cellular respiration is we're going to keep up with these guys here. Now, you don't have to know what their actual names are, but they're just chemical compounds. This is like nicotinamide adenine diphosphate, okay? We don't have to worry about that. You just need to know them as NAD and FAD, okay? These are actually coenzymes is what they are. And so what we're going to do is these molecules here, you can see that that has a positive charge, so it's going to welcome the introduction of negative electrons. So by moving that H, remember with the H, we're carrying a proton and we're carrying 2 electrons, okay? So whenever this NAD is reduced, it's going to become NADH. All right, so what is it doing? It's carrying electrons or energy to be used later. You can see this one here has a 2+ charge, and so it's going to carry 2 hydrogens. Once again, what is it doing? It's carrying electrons for us. It's carrying energy to be used later. So as we go through, we're going to keep up with these guys. All right, so I mentioned earlier that cellular respiration was not just one big chemical reaction. It's actually a series of much smaller steps. And so what we're going to see in cellular respiration is a series of 4 stages. We have glycolysis, pyruvate oxidation, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Our goal today is to get through glycolysis, okay? And then we'll save the rest for tomorrow. So we'll also cover a little bit about anaerobic respiration in today's lesson. All right, so we're going to start with glycolysis. Now, if you look at your essays for this particular unit, you have 3 diagrams that you're going to fill out. One diagram is all about glycolysis. Okay, I'm going to make a separate video for that and kind of show you how to fill that out and kind of give you some tips and hints for studying. Now, glycolysis literally means breaking sugar. Okay, glyco refers to sugar, lysis means to break. So in glycolysis, this is the beginning of the breakdown of our glucose. It is the starting point. Whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, glycolysis is always going to be where we start. Now, you can see that it's not super efficient. Glycolysis gives us only 2 ATP per glucose. And as we go through, we're going to be really kind of focusing on what's going in and what's coming out, okay? So what's going in is glucose, and from this process, we are going to generate 2 ATP, okay? Now, this particular process, we know that mighty mitochondria produces energy, but it actually starts in the cytosol, okay? So glycolysis is something that you don't have to have a mitochondria for. It's going to happen in the cytoplasm or in the cytosol. Just to kind of give you a little bit of evolutionary perspective, okay, early on, first cells did not have mitochondria. They didn't have those complex membranes, and so glycolysis is believed to be an ancient pathway. It actually was around before there was even oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen wasn't present until the evolution of photosynthetic pathways, and so glycolysis is pretty much what we call our ancient pathway for producing energy. Pretty much all organisms are going to do glycolysis. Now, whether they follow it up with fermentation or aerobic respiration is going to depend on the type of organism that it is. All right, so here's an overview. Okay, overviews are going to be very important. Once again, what we're going to keep up with over the course of cellular respiration is what's going in and what's coming out, okay? So it's actually 10 reactions. This is what your essay is going to involve. They're each catalyzed by a different enzyme, and so it's actually kind of a chain reaction type of event. But essentially, we're starting with glucose, which has 6 carbons, and we're breaking it into 2 pyruvates, which has 3 carbons. Okay, so literally, we're taking a 6-carbon sugar, and we're breaking it down into 2 3-carbon sugars. Now, in that process, okay, we're going to produce a total of 4 ATP, but it actually uses 2, and we're going to see that when we label that diagram. And so for glycolysis, it's going to be important that we understand the net. Okay, this is our actual bring home. All right, so we made 4, but we used 2, so we're gaining 2 ATP in glycolysis. We're also going to reduce 2 of those electron carriers. Now, why are these important? They're storing energy to be used later, okay? By carrying electrons, they're storing energy for later. All right, so in glycolysis, we're starting with glucose. We're breaking glucose into 2 pyruvates. Sometimes those are called pyruvic acids. And in the process of taking glucose to pyruvates, we gain 2 ATP and 2 NADH, okay? So this right here is going to be an important thing to know, okay? All right, so here we can see that there's actually 2 main parts to glycolysis. We have the energy investment phase. Okay, this is where the 2 ATP are going in. And then we have an energy payoff phase where we're producing 4 ATP. Once again, what are we getting from glycolysis? We're getting 2 ATPs and we're getting 2 NADHs. The ATPs can be used immediately, and the NADHs are storing energy to be used later, okay? All right, so here's the first half. Now, one of our essays is going to be something similar to this, okay? So I just want to point out a couple of things, and I'm going to do this again when I talk about your essay. All right, notice we're starting with glucose. So this is just the first 5 steps, okay? Here you have ATP going in a couple of these reactions. All right, these black words here, those are the products of each reaction. So in the first reaction, glucose is turned into glucose 6-phosphate. And then that's turned into fructose 6-phosphate. And then, so these are my products. So one of the things that you're doing on your essay is you are filling out the products of each step. Okay, so this is going to be your first 5 steps. And so these black words here are the products of each reaction. And then red are enzymes. So all the red words are the enzymes that are catalyzing that reaction. Okay, so notice something here. ACE, 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 ACE. All of your enzymes end in ACE, okay? And so that's going to be helpful when you have to do your diagrams on your essay. So this is going to be the first 5 steps. Notice ATP is going in there, okay? Whereas here, this is our second 5 steps. We have ATP coming out, All right, once again, the black words represent the products and the red words represent the enzymes, okay? So as a whole, we started with glucose, we end with pyruvates, and from this process, we're going to get 2 ATP that the cells can use, and we're also getting 2 NADHs that you see there. All right, so what we've just looked at, that's an example of what we call substrate level phosphorylation. Now, substrate, I know this word can be intimidating, but it's actually quite simple. Okay, substrate refers to the reactant that binds to an enzyme. All right, so substrate level phosphorylation involves enzyme reactions. Okay, and then this big word here, phosphorylation, means we are adding a phosphate. So anytime we add a phosphate to something, we are phosphorylating it, and phosphorylation equals energizing. So when that ATP loses a phosphate and that phosphate goes to something like a protein, it energizes the protein. Now, what we're doing is we're phosphorylating ADP. So in order to make this molecule over here, in order to make ATP, which has 3 phosphates, we have to add a phosphate onto ADP. Okay, well, anytime you add or anytime you make a bond, it requires some energy. So what we're doing in this whole process is we're breaking down molecules and we're getting energy so that we can add phosphates to make ATP, okay? And so phosphorylation is just adding a phosphate to something. And so when we're using energy from enzyme reactions, we call that substrate level phosphorylation. Now, just as a quick review, in substrate level phosphorylation, we got 2 ATP, okay? So keep that in mind because we're going to be comparing this type of phosphorylation to another type. All right, so this is our branching point, and we're almost done with this video. I know it kind of feels a little overwhelming, but at this point we have made 2 pyruvates, okay? Now this is our branching point. If oxygen is not present, we are going to go the anaerobic route, okay? And fermentation is going to follow glycolysis. But if oxygen is present, this is where we're going to involve the mitochondria. We're going to carry out the rest of cellular respiration or aerobic, and this is going to be a much more efficient pathway, okay? We're going to be talking about aerobic respiration tomorrow, okay? I just want to do a quick overview of fermentation, though, and then we're going to call it a day on this lesson. And so in fermentation, what it does is it allows the cell to continue glycolysis, okay? So essentially, anaerobic respiration is glycolysis and fermentation. All right, so what's going to happen is we're going to continue this cycle, okay? What fermentation does is it allows us to continue glycolysis. So what we need are these electron carriers, because in glycolysis, we reduced these NADs. And so in order to continue glycolysis, we need these NADs that we can add the hydrogens to. So the whole purpose of fermentation is to regenerate those electron carriers, okay? So there's actually 2 different types of fermentation. There's alcoholic fermentation, and this is essentially how you make alcohol or booze. This is how you make wine. This is how you make beer. You have organisms like yeast that do this, bacteria. And essentially what they do is they take those pyruvates and they convert them to ethanol alcohol and carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is also what happens in your bread. So if you're using yeast in your bread, it causes these CO2 bubbles to be released, and that's what causes your bread dough to rise. And so alcoholic fermentation is essentially turning pyruvates into ethanol alcohol and carbon dioxide. And notice that we are recycling those electron carriers. All right, the other type is lactic acid fermentation, and this is the type that you can do in your muscle cells. Pyruvate is actually going to be converted into lactic acid instead. So you can see down here that those 3-carbon pyruvates are going to be converted into 3-carbon lactic acids. This is a reversible process because we're not losing the carbons in those gas molecules. And so if you've ever been sore after a workout, it could be due to lactic acid buildup in your muscles. Now, we cannot survive off fermentation, but in times of need, like when you're doing a heavy workout, your muscles may resort to lactic acid fermentation, especially your big muscles, when they're feeling oxygen deprived. but it's going to be short term. Okay, we must have oxygen in order to make enough energy. But this is another way that we could at least continue glycolysis. But once again, we're getting a whopping 2 ATP at a time. All right, so this is where we're going to stop for today. Okay, glycolysis was the start. Glucose was turned into pyruvates. And once again, we got 2 ATP and 2 NADHs. All right, guys, I know that's a lot. It's going to be important that you process it, look in your study guide, and I'm also going to make another video to help you out with your essay. All right, talk to you later.